Hello, welcome. Today we'll be talking about carry systems. Now, when I say carry systems, I mean both covert or concealment systems and over or outside the waistband carry systems. Of those systems, the heart of it is going to be the handgun, and this is a standard Glock 17 in the Roland special configuration. As before, we're going to use our standard methodology of discussing what the equipment is, why it's selected, what its merits are, and what are some alternative choices, and what are things that have predated it as a concept. Now, when we talk about carry systems, that would mean either a concealed loadout or some kind of overt loadout. This concept is meant to go from one to the other with relative ease and allow you to have the maximum amount of capability you could possibly have out of a handgun, as if it would be your primary weapon or secondary weapon in some circumstances, but if you had to rely on it as a primary, you would be getting the most capability out of it. So at the heart of this is going to be a Glock 17 Gen 4 in a Roland special style configuration. What that means is you have a KKM barrel with a KKM 4-port comp, a Surefire X300 weapon light, a Trijicon SRO with the 1 MOA dot, a CHP weapon systems plate, Trijicon HD suppressor height sights, and a Overwatch precision tack trigger, and a Magpul concealment mag well. Other than that, all the internal parts such as the safeties, the springs are all stock. I do not want to modify or do anything to this gun that would render it unsafe or unreliable, which is the easiest way to make a Glock unreliable, is to start modifying internal components. On the concealment side, we're going to have a T-Rex Arms 2.0 sidecar with the magazine carrier detached. On the overt side, we're going to have a Safariland with a QLS mount. This is going to be a Safariland Glock 34 holster, and there's some modifications done to it that we'll show you later on, so it can accommodate the larger style of optics or any optic that is more forward seated like the SRO. Otherwise, this would fit a RMR style optic without any issues. Ammunition that is primarily shot through this is going to be 147 grain, so this is Speer Lawman 147 grain, and Federal HST or Gold Dot 147 grain as well. Really quickly, we'll talk about the holster configurations. So with the concealment holster, this is going to be a T-Rex Arms 2.0 sidecar with the magazine carrier detached. This was purchased before all the drama and nonsense somewhere around 2022, so it's got a little bit of wear to it. Starting off with the belt clip. Why does the belt clip have this piece of tape on there? Essentially, this has a little bit of a tolerance gap between the belt that I wear, so I've used the tape to take up some of that slack, some of that play in the tolerances to have it a tighter fit. With things like this, I want it to stay exactly where I want it, and I don't want it to shift around on the belt line or do all kinds of things like that. That is not optimal for having the life-saving equipment that you plan to use shift around or not be where you want, because then you have a bad grip, a bad draw, follow-on consequences. It's not a fight you want to lose. You want to be optimally set up at all times. The next piece is going to be the Ranger Band. Why is there a Ranger Band? Like I said, this was purchased in 2022, so it's got a little bit of wear on it. It's been in the hot suns of Tennessee and Florida. It's had quite a lot of thousands and thousands of draws out of it, so the tolerances and the internal dimensions of it have faded ever so slightly. And even with the tension screws all the way maxed out, it still isn't enough tension at this point, just due to wear and use of the equipment, which is something you experience when you actually use your equipment. Other than that, there's no other notable modifications to this, just the tape on the belt clip and the Ranger Band. Now, why is this run separately from the mag carrier as opposed to some other builds that have it something like this where they're together? I like my concealment system to have a little bit of play where I wear it, where it is a gap in the center that allows me to articulate or bend over at the waist and pick certain things up, as opposed to both of these being together, and it becomes a little bit of a limiting factor. For the mag carrier, same thing. I want this to be exactly where I want it. That's why the tape is there to take up some of the slack or the play in the tolerances. And it's also maxed out on the tightness to hold this 22 round magazine in there. So that is the purpose of that. As far as the overt systems, the Safariland Glock 34. What this is a, like I said, Glock 34 Safariland with a QLS mod. I'll show you a picture of the inside of how this looks compared to a standard Glock 17 holster. but this is the general modification you're going to have to make if you plan to use any kind of SRO or aimpoint acro style optics on here, and you're going to have to open up the dimensions of this. Now there are holsters that come with the correct dimensions for this. This is merely if you have a older style holster, a RDS style that does not accommodate larger style optics. It accommodates RMR style or RMR dimension optics. The only other modification needed to be made to this to fit the KKM comp was a little bit of dremeling on this back end. Additionally, you won't be able to use the light cap or the barrel port on the Safariland holsters as they commonly come with because of the dimensions of the firearm. On the 17 holster, it actually sticks all the way out if you use that one, which I did for a bit of time. When you insert the handgun into the holster, it does have full retention. So it stays locked in there, does not come out, so form and function is as you want it. So let's get into the why. Why would you modify a Glock like this? Well, ideally a Glock out of the box as it comes is reliable. It doesn't have very many issues. There are some issues with how the performance of the gun can be at the top end, but on the low end the gun fires, it cycles, it does the appropriate things that a firearm should. Modifying a stock Glock into this has certain benefits. Some of you may be asking, isn't a regular Glock just as good as? Well, in the just as good as debate, it's always on the losing end for the person trying to argue what something is just as good as, because there's always going to be benefits to advancing or having better equipment that is specialized for a certain task. How do we know that this to be true? Well, before you take my word on it, if you've read any literature regarding firearm shooting, if you've read any of the Ben Steger, Joel Park books, or looked at any of the dry fire stuff, you'll notice that there's certain parts in there when we talk about live fire, that there's a section regarding live fire times. Usually it says something like comps and breaks can significantly affect the performance or your performance when doing these drills. So we know that even at the high end level, people recognize that comps and breaks or any kind of those specific modifiers can affect the performance of a weapon significantly, because some of those times are adjusted for comps and breaks, and some of them are just general times for you to start trying to attempt, right? So that's someone else's opinion on it before I even tell you mine, right? The original purpose of a Glock 17, or really Glock 19, in the Roland special configuration was to enhance the baseline performance. If you are familiar with a gentleman by the name of Chuck Pressburg, he's the original one that kind of founded it. Now, when Chuck said originally why he wanted this is because he was tired of cleaning off the carbon that was on his weapon light, so he got the KKM 4-port comp, which does not, it's closed off on the bottom, so you're not going to get much carbon on the weapon light. Now, that's a pretty trivial thing to not have to deal with, but there's also obvious benefits to the 4-port comp, such as recoil mitigation, which is significant. Now, many people say, why do you need to recoil mitigate 9mm? It's not that serious as a round. You're not a man, you can't handle the recoil of 9mm, which there is an opinion for people like that. However, specifically showing you shooting a similar firearm, such as a Gen 6 Glock 17 that does not have a compensator, it should be pretty apparent that my times, my splits, my performance is generally better with this gun than it is in this gun. This is my competition gun that I shoot in carry optics. This is my gun that I shoot in open minor. I shoot this in carry optics from concealment and from outside the waistband in a level 2 or level 3 holster sometimes, just to see it, to get some data for it. Now, this I shoot out of concealment, and same thing out of this level 2 holster. The performance of this is always going to beat this for me. It might not be the same for you. These things have the exact same trigger, the exact same optics. So part of it is really just the equipment coming down to things like the barrel. I can tell you from shooting both of these that, again, my performance is always better with this, and that is partially because of the comp, obviously, right? I'm stacking as much performance equipment or equipment that can increase my performance as possible. So that is just my data on using those two similar firearms. So you might be asking, does this really make a big difference in competition? So this is shot in open minor, which is technically not a very optimal route to go. If you're shooting open division in something like USPSA, you're gonna want something that has major power factor, so it has a lot hotter ammo. It's got a frame mounted optic as opposed to a slide mounted optic. It's got large mag wells, 32 round mags, stuff like that. If I'm shooting it versus carry optics, or if I'm shooting the carry optics gun, there's more of an emphasis on working harder to shoot a stock gun with similar-esque conditions. That would be more of like a training role. I want to see how I perform without all the additional benefits of the compensator in a stock configuration. I don't shoot competition to be super competitive. Essentially for me, one of my biggest restrictions is finding a range to shoot or having it available to me. That would make it very optimal for me to go to a match where someone has set up the targets for me. I don't have to pick up the brass. I just show up, shoot, my data is recorded, and I compete against other people to see how I perform on that specific day. I record it, and I log it for data or show others, right? So for me, competition isn't so much as achieving the ranking system or doing super well. At the end of the day, it's the training value that I get of it. Now, if I do good, that's also, that's a plus. But that is not the main reason. If you consider the history of how people have trained to do certain things like war or combat, you'll know that things like the Olympics or sports are simply a way to prepare people to do another task that otherwise would be very boring. Such as, hey, you could run, or you could play something like soccer that has a large amount of time of conducting cardio, or basketball, or football. Something that, instead of just going for a run, is a more fun way of conducting exercise. Same thing with this. You could do endless hours of dry fire and endless hours of repetition. Sometimes this is a way to break up the monotony, and you do it through competition, similar to how similar sports in the Olympics are challenged, like the javelin throw, wrestling, subjects like that. Now, the difference between open major guns and this gun, obviously this is open minor. So I have the opportunity to actually carry this gun in a concealment holster, not just a super raced out competition holster. Now, most guys who are shooting open major, in fact, I'm pretty sure everyone that's shooting open major is not carrying concealed or otherwise their open major gun. It is specifically for competition purposes. They're not going to be getting any kind of use of it, defensive use, outside of the competition world. Versus with this, I'm carrying this. I've carried this gun now for 10 years in this configuration minus some changes to the optic. So it's been reliable for 10 years. I've used it in concealed systems and overt systems, and it's performed phenomenally well. It's given me the edge quite a bit of times. And that's kind of when we talk about training value out of competition, that's what I'm getting, because I can have this system with all these special pieces of equipment and use in either role, and it can flow from concealment to overt fairly easily. You can't do that with an open major gun that has, depending on what the open major gun is, of course, but you can't really do that. Guys shooting open major aren't really doing that. And then the second question you're probably going to have is, are you actually carrying this gun? And I'll tell you, yes, I have. I've carried it. When I go to the store, it's with me. When I'm going for a long drive somewhere, going to a training event, this gun is on my body. It's not getting taken out of the waistband and put in the glove box, or it's not getting put in the cup holder. Like, it's physically on me. I carry it all the time. Now, most people think that's just unrealistic, and for some people, it very well might be. This is not a system for everyone. There's very specific benefits and very specific downsides to carrying a system like this that I want to talk about. But more importantly, some people just are flabbergasted in disbelief that a person could carry a gun that is essentially almost Glock 17 length, certainly more than 34 length. And I'll tell you that it's a thing, it happens. Just because you cannot perceive it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. Now, there's a biblical quotes about the flesh being weak and things like that, but in this scenario, I'll tell you, the flesh is weak, but the mind perseveres. So just because there's not the level of comfort that you are acceptable dealing with, doesn't mean that this is not the system that cannot be done. With this system, I am attempting to maximize the performance I can have in either the concealment or the overt roles. So that is more, getting now more to the serious side of this, is if I'm in a scenario where this equipment is likely to be used, I want to stack the odds in my favor in whatever way possible. This is essentially the only weapon I could have at that time, so I'd want it to be the most optimal weapon for that occasion. I can't carry a SBR or some kind of PCC in a backpack most often. I'm sure there's someone who does, and that system might seem outlandish to me, but to them, that's the way the game goes. Now, that's usually something more of a protective security role or special event kind of role, but if you're that individual, bravo to you, because you're probably packing the most amount of capability. However, is it realistic, and is this something you can carry everywhere? That's a different discussion. But moving to the more serious aspect, on a survival sense, I want to maximize my chances of survival in whatever that engagement might be. It could be an engagement at 5 yards, 25 yards, 50 yards. I have the capability to deal with it at all. The equipment is not the sole source of this, it is the skill level. The equipment merely enhances the ability to get that skill out there or utilize all of that skill. Is it just as good to have a stock Glock with irons? I'm sure you could get the job done, but no one is carrying a stock Glock with irons to do some of the more serious tasks, at least if you're not very committed to it, you're not. So I also happen to be in an occupation that has certain obligations, certain duties to act. So if I am carrying this in a off-duty capacity, again, I want to have the most amount of capability to not only save my life or an innocent person's life. I don't want to be in a suboptimal configuration when that scenario happens. Additionally, we have to look at legal consequences. So if this is involved in some kind of defensive shooting, this weapon is going to be confiscated. So I want you to think about the dollar value of a stock Glock with all these components versus something like a 2011 style system where you're $2,000 or more out of the gate, and then you add the modifications, the magazines, and stuff like that. So there's a certain logistical consideration that you need to do with choosing stuff like this. You need to have time to get a new gun, re-equip it, zero it, all the supporting equipment and things like that, pending it's not confiscated. You also have to think about the logistical subjects to this. So if something breaks in this gun, how long does it take me to fix it? Is it a hand-fitted part? Can I just go to a normal gun store and they'll have a piece of parts? Can I have it next day shipped to me off of a website somewhere? All those considerations are, for the most part, pretty easily sorted out in here. So while we're talking about logistics, let's talk about some of the modifications and why deliberately the modifications have been made or not made. The original Roland Special gun is going to be made by ATEI. That is the company that makes the as-is specification for the Roland Special. Now, the actual Roland Special build has front serrations, a trigger guard undercut. It has direct milling instead of an optic plate. I'm sure the irons are probably going to be a little different. It has a bit more of an aggressive flared magwell. And then there's some tuning to the internal parts. Now I want to address modifying the gun. The internal components, other than the barrel and the trigger and the disconnector, are stock. So the safety plunger spring, extractor, depressor plunger, the extractor, trigger assembly, all of those components are stock. Why is that? So the original Roland Special builds calls for a lightened recoil spring and some modification of the other parts. Now that will cause it to be on the very bleeding edge of reliability, because now we're talking about lightening the recoil spring, modifying certain parts. Could it be used in a defensive purpose? Absolutely. However, I've had maximal success without modifying any of those parts because I get the performance capabilities of the comp and all the other accessories, minus something like the trigger guard, cutter, the front serrations, but the reliability has not been reduced at all. And that's why the original build, what it calls for, you start to get some issues, especially in wearing out of parts. When we talk about wearing out the recoil spring significantly sooner, that's an issue you're going to run up. Now it becomes more of a high performance and high maintenance firearm as opposed to the general reliabilities of the Glock. The way I've executed it for 10 years is I simply swap out the base components such as the barrel and modifying of the optic and a little bit of the trigger, and that's it. We're not modifying anything past the trigger, like for example, the trigger shoe, the trigger bar, and the disconnector. All those other components inside the Glock stay stock to avoid any kind of reduction in reliability. And so far, I'm on my second full set of parts. So I've had to swap out the extractor, the depressor plunger, the trigger assembly, the extractor, and even replaced the safety plunger or safety plunger spring. All those parts have been, and the firing pin assembly, of course, all those parts have been worn out, and I'm on my second iteration of them, so there's been a reliable wear pattern of those parts. There's nothing unpredictable or surprising in how this is executed. I'm just saying that the execution of how the original Roland Special build is sometimes off-putting to people, especially the price and the maintenance issues. The way this is executed is meant to minimize all that while still having the benefits of that specific system. Now, getting into the history of these types of open style guns becoming carry or duty guns. Now, I'll show you several images of many guns that have been carried in duty capacities that look similar to this or have similar-esque features. And the first thing that comes to mind is, other than the original Roland Special build itself, you have the Geisley 6-second mount. Now again, you're going to see that that mount and that system was designed for a very specific occupation to be used in a scenario where the handgun was the primary system. It was meant to be used in a very offensive style role, and you'll see stuff like frame-mounted optics are back in play again, being used in a more tactical scenario, if you will. So it's not unreasonable to see that being done. And does that system have certain flaws? Like, yeah, I'm sure getting a holster for that is going to be quite difficult. Someone did make a holster, but that series has since been discontinued. However, that's just one example of open style guns being used in a carry or duty capacity. The next one you'll see is the Glock 34. Glock 34s have originally been a competition style gun when shooting irons because of the longer sight radius from the front sight to the rear sight. However, people have also done things like porting them, where they basically cut part of the barrel open and part of the slide open to lighten some of the weight and improve the recoil characteristics of the gun. Some people use those guns in a duty capacity as well, so it's not uncommon to see those sometimes. The last one is probably the one that is going to be most familiar with the setup. Now, some people don't believe it's necessary or it's unrealistic to have, like I said, a compensator on a carry gun, but if you're familiar with this piece of equipment, which is a Radian ramjet with afterburner combo, this is a pretty common setup. When I shoot USPSA matches and I see a guy has an open division gun or he's classified as open division, more often than not, if it's not a actual competition style open major gun and he's shooting open minor, it'll sometimes look something like this, where the person has essentially done the Glock 19 with Radian ramjet afterburner combo. It's got an optic mounted on it, it's got a light, stuff like that, and they carry that gun. Now, sometimes they shoot it from overt, and sometimes they shoot it from covert or concealment, but the concept that this is unrealistic just doesn't show up as far as what I've seen. Just going to matches and watching people shoot, this is becoming equally as common, if not more common, as carry guns, such as the classic guns like this. So there really isn't that much data from my experience, again, to say that this is an unrealistic build. People are realizing that, hey, there's certain modifications that make handguns shoot better, and at the end of the day, that's what I want. I want a gun that's simple to shoot. And on this, it's a no-brainer. This is a shorter gun. It's going to have more or different or more difficult recoil impulses than a full-size handgun. So we want to control that. Other manufacturers have got on board by simply shipping guns from the factory that already have compensators and brakes for them, which makes absolute sense. Specifically, honorable mention to Mike Panone of CTT Solutions. He likes to shoot some of these smaller compact style guns as if they were full-size guns, very aggressively and getting extremely remarkable results in competition. So this concept isn't that outlandish. It might be new or unfamiliar to you if you're not in the firearms training space as often as some others are, but this is definitely a subject for you to consider. Now, shooting open minor is certainly a detractor to some, but at the end of the day, if you're interested in more of the training value in competing, that shouldn't be an off-putting subject to you. It's just another way to get data. So that's one note of consideration. Now, if you want to learn some of the original history about the Roland Special, I suggest you go to Primary and Secondary, either the website or the YouTube channel, and look up some of the modcasts regarding the Roland Special. Now, the history behind it, why it's called the Roland Special, it was originally named by a gentleman on Primary and Secondary named Roland Duchesne, who later became more apparent and famous as Chuck Pressburg. Now you can look up Chuck Pressburg's career and history, it's clearly very impressive, but the reasons why he articulates the development of a weapon such as this, what its purposes is, what he encountered, because originally he started off with a Glock 17 in this configuration. Later on, it became the Glock 19 that really set it up as the Roland Special build, giving it 34 style length, giving compatibility with 34 style holsters, and solving a lot of those logistical issues for him. Now, granted, this strays from that original build that ATI makes, but the merits of it are clearly apparent. And the last thing I'd like to touch on is simply, I understand that this concept is not for everyone. That is apparent. The modifications to the gun are not for everyone. I know some people that don't even carry red dots on their gun, and their agency issued gun has a red dot on it. So the nicest gun that they have is a government issued Glock 47 with a red dot, because none of their other guns have red dots on them, right? People live their lives differently. Will someone carry a longer than Glock 34 style length gun? Some won't, and it makes sense. Some people are board shorts with the Glock 48 or some kind of other subcompact gun because that fits their lifestyle. But for my particular use case, taking my own survival very seriously, the obligations of the occupation that I have, and the moral considerations of stopping violent acts and being the most optimally suited to stop those, whether it's for myself or on someone else's behalf, is something I take very seriously. And when I do, or if I have to perform those acts, I want to be in the most optimal configuration possible and to ensure everyone else's survival, because it could be seconds that is shaved off in that engagement, and the seconds shaved off in some of the basic firearm or marksmanship tasks that this handgun enhances. I want those same things to happen when it's all on the line. So that's a bit of a more serious note to end things. Again, this is the Roland Special-esque build, not exactly. The actual build is made by ATI. If you want to learn some of the history behind it and comments made by Chuck Pressburg, you can look up the Roland Special or primary and secondary modcast regarding the Roland Special. As always, things like this are critical to developing your skills, but going out there and shooting is what gives you the data to know if this works or not. Again, don't take my word. You can do the research yourself, shoot it yourself, and see if it works for you, because listening to other people try to sell you nonsense and garbage on the internet sometimes is going to lead you down a very sad path.